This is The Other Side of Midnight. I'm Frank Morano. I'll tell you, one of the most interesting people out there is Dr. Edward Belbruno. This is a fellow that is very accomplished in way too many different fields. If you ever want to feel bad about yourself, just pull up a copy of Edward Belbruno's resume. He's got more degrees than a thermometer. He's an artist. He's a mathematician. He's a scientist. And he's not just any scientist. He's a scientist with a diversity of interests and expertise: celestial mechanics, dynamical systems, dynamical astronomy, aerospace engineering. Worked for many years in NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. The guy is a pretty accomplished guy. Dr. Belbruno, thanks so much for joining me on the radio.
Hey, thanks. I see why this is called The Other Side of Midnight.
Yeah, believe me, you get the hang of the time eventually. All right. So for folks that are unfamiliar with your career, tell us a little bit about the work that you did at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. How long were you there, and what projects were you responsible for being a part of?
Yeah, I went there I was about around 1985, a long time ago. And I just out of graduate school. I was a professor for a while at Boston University, didn't like it. And then I switched to work for NASA. And my background is in the field of celestial mechanics, the way things move in outer space. And I was doing research in it after I got my PhD from NYU. And I really didn't like the research world. So I was hired to go out there to JPL. And basically, for those listening, JPL, that's the place that lands those spaceships on Mars, you see, and does deep space missions. So I was hired to design trajectories for the Galileo mission to Jupiter, and the Cassini mission to Saturn, the Magellan mission to Venus, and all of those. And more or less standard work. I mean, you're sitting there in front of a desk just designing trajectories for these major multi-billion-dollar missions. But I noticed when I was there that what got me going was I kept my research going that I had back in my research life. I got sick of being an engineer because I was trained as a math guy, not in the field of engineering where I found myself. And so to keep myself busy, I was designing new ways to get to the moon, believe it or not. And the usual way to get there it's basically a ballistic shot like out of a cannon. You just aim towards the moon. You go there almost in a straight line. And it takes about 3 days. And when you get there, you're going really too fast. So you got to slow down, and you have to spend a lot of money for fuel because it's expensive. It's like $1 million a pound, believe it or not. So the Apollo spacecraft spent something like $250 million just to slow down. So I got interested in the problem. Is it possible to get to the moon and use absolutely no fuel at all to get captured around the moon?
I want to get back to the moon situation and the new routes to the moon in just a second, because I found that pretty fascinating. But I wanted to the reason I was eager to have you on the program this morning was because of your work into and your interest in dark matter. Recently, there's been a lot of news related to dark matter. And I have to be honest, I'm not even sure I understand what dark matter is. Can you explain, even in a manner that someone like me can understand, what is dark matter?
Okay, well, no one knows what it is actually, and I just published a pretty interesting paper on this with James Green, who's the chief scientist of NASA. And in any event, dark matter is an invisible substance. You can't see it. However, it's got gravity on it. So just to give you an idea of this, in our galaxy where we live, there's like 200 billion stars. Our sun is just one of them. In our galaxy, if you counted up all the stars, of which is a gigantic number, and you put it on a scale and weighed it, you'd only get 5% of the mass that's actually there. 95% of the mass of our galaxy, we can't see it. We don't even know where it is. So it's an unknown substance, and the paper I just published on it actually is the first paper ever to come up with a way to directly measure it without actually knowing what it is with a spaceship, seeing how a spaceship can deflect its orbit and thereby figure out that the dark matter is actually there. But it's totally invisible. And there's all kinds of theories about what it is, and it's a pretty cool thing. The James Webb Telescope. Hopefully, we'll get some information about what it might be. But right now, it's a complete mystery. But basically, it's 98% of our galaxy. So without exaggerating, when you're talking to someone across the room, 98% of the room is missing, roughly.
Wow, that's something. Now, I know that that this has been around, this idea, for a while now, and that a lot of physicists have proposed that this invisible substance called dark matter was providing extra gravitational pull, causing the stars to speed up. And that's a theory that a lot of people subscribe to. But then when I was trying to do a little research, I found that there's a whole bunch of scientists, a whole bunch of physicists that don't even believe that dark matter exists. How can there be such wide debate among physicists about whether dark matter even exists?
Well, it's interesting you ask that. That's really interesting because if you look at the data, it's pretty clear that there's a substance there, and they can see it indirectly, the way the light deflects around galaxies, distant galaxies. Now, there was a theory for a while which sort of disputed this, and I think that's what you're alluding to. It's called the modified theory of gravity, the MON theory, and it basically said that there is nothing there. That actually what's going on is that the gravitational force that we all grew up with, Newton's force, which is the inverse square force, is actually not accurate when you're getting to gigantic things like the galaxy are much bigger than that. And therefore, if you try to use that, the old gravity that we know in the textbooks, if you try to use that to measure the way things are moving in our galaxy, it's not going to work, and you're going to see anomalies. So what they did observe is that things moving towards the middle of our galaxy move with a certain velocity, and if you believe in Newton's field, it would say that the further out you go, they'd have to go slower and slower. And it turns out they don't. They actually speed up. So there's something out there making that happen. And they say, well, it's due to the fact that you have to modify the field of gravity, and there's really nothing there. However, that's been shown to be not true. It's very clear that there's been new results in astrophysics to show that the MON theory is simply not correct. That dark matter is definitely there. Now, the popular science literature seems to be loaded with these articles trying to disprove it, but from what I can see and what was in my last paper, they're simply not true.
We're talking with Dr. Edward Belbruno, artist, mathematician, scientist. What are your thoughts on this Hadron Collider? And a lot of people I know were concerned that this could open up a portal to another dimension or something along those lines. Is this collider something that will further the study of dark matter at all?
Yeah, it could, because there's, no one knows, like I said, no one knows what excuse my language, but no one knows what the hell it is. And there's all kinds of strange theories about it. But one of them is that it could be a subatomic particle causing it, subparticle that you can't even see it. It's a little tiny particle floating around like a, proton, neutron, but something in that area. And it would have a certain mass, et cetera, et cetera. And you need a sufficiently high energy to really see if these particles are there. So it's possible that the Large Hadron Collider would be able to make big enough collisions so they'd see remnants of the collision and evidence of this particle. And it's totally possible that could happen.
All right. Talk to me a little bit about your work in developing a new route, or maybe new routes to the moon. How many different ways can you go to the moon? I would have assumed that the quickest way from here to the moon is a straight line. Is that not the case?
Yeah, it's pretty much a straight line. It's actually an ellipse, which is highly elongated. But for all practical purposes, if you were looking down on the Earth-Moon system and you went off to the moon on that route, it would be almost a straight line. And it was developed actually in the 1920s by this German engineer called Hohmann. His name was Walter Hohmann. It was used in all early missions to the moon, et cetera. And the disadvantage of that is it gets you there quick. It's great for astronauts. In fact, they used something like that for the Apollo. However, when you get there, you're going really fast, and you have to slow down to go in orbit around the moon. Otherwise, you just fly by, and that's the end of you. So the slowing down part is very expensive. It's dangerous because you have to slow down. If you don't slow down correctly, you just fly by the moon. but it's $1 million a pound for fuel. So, like I mentioned earlier, it's $250 million for the Apollo spacecraft to slow down. So I was interested in the problem, when I arrived at JPL years ago. Is it possible to get something to go to the moon where you don't have to worry about using fuel to go into orbit? So basically, it's a trade-off. You can definitely, I found out after some work, you can definitely do it, but it takes a lot longer to get there. Instead of taking 3 days, it takes 3 months. And I was very, very lucky to be able to justify the theory I cooked up to do this when I was almost fired because of my job, because I thought my work was not worth it. And I luckily, as the things would line up, I was totally vindicated. Before I actually left JPL, I had the opportunity to actually rescue an errant Japanese lunar mission called Hiten, Hiten, and Japan launched this thing to the moon in 1991 in January, and it was 2 spacecraft going around the Earth. And the Hiten spacecraft was the larger one, about the size of a desk, and it was never designed to go to the moon. And a small one attached to it was, and it went off to the moon. It just never made it. It was a failed mission, so they were desperate to save the other one. And as I was about to leave JPL, this engineer, James Miller, contacted me and said, Japan really wants to save their mission. Can your crazy theory work? And it was one of those moments in my life where I suddenly saw how to do it. All those years, I just suddenly, that's how you do that. So we went to the computer, did it, it worked, and about a year later, they actually rescued this Japanese mission and got it to the moon. It took 5 months to get there.
Wow.
But it took absolutely no fuel whatsoever to go into orbit. So it's been now used several times, and the current mission, which has been in the news, the Capstone mission, is using the same trajectory.
And what's the Capstone mission?
It's sending a CubeSat to the moon, a small little spaceship, probably not much bigger than a trash can. And it's going to go, when it gets to the moon, its goal is going to be to go into a new kind of orbit they've never used before that goes around the lunar poles. And it's called a rectilinear halo orbit. And they're going to test out getting into that orbit is really what it's about.
I mean, that's got to make you feel good, developing a route to the moon that's been used to rescue various craft over the years. That's pretty impressive. I know that you hold some patents on various space routes, I guess including that one. I didn't even know that you can patent a space route. Can I patent a shortcut to Yankee Stadium or something?
Actually, you could. So the way it works is in the patent industry, you don't actually patent the route to the moon. What you have to patent is the algorithm to actually find it. So it boils down to a computer program, and you have to put the program in there. It's like an algorithm, and then you put in the route that you're doing. You explain why it's important, and they have to check it out, make sure no one's done that before. But it's called an algorithm patent. And when people patent like these. Remember that sheep years ago, Dolly, I think, where they had some.
Oh yeah. The clone sheep.
The clone sheep.
Supposedly.
That process, that's also an algorithm patent, and they got a patent for doing that by patenting the process.
Oh, I see. Okay, that's interesting. Hey, do you have a take on why the United States, why NASA, why America has not been back to the moon since the 1970s? It seemed like there was so much enthusiasm for lunar travel with the Apollo program, and then interest just sort of waned. And then the last few presidents have all talked about going back, and we'll see what happens with Artemis. But do you have a take on why it's been a half century since we've been to the moon?
Yeah. One of my good friends, Neil Tyson, talks about this too. But no, I have a really good take on this. So basically, it was just all politics to begin with. I mean, there was a desire to go, but at the time we went in the 70s, or early 70s, it was purely to beat the Soviet Union there. And once that was done, they just got rid of it because it was too expensive. Each one of those Saturn V rockets they used to launch to the moon, I don't know the exact price today. I can't even begin to estimate. I'm going to guess each one today would have been, well over $1 billion. So, you have to justify keeping those going, and they just didn't want to get into that. Also, it was the end of the Cold War. The Cold War was still going on, but they had beat Russia. And then the Iranian thing happened with the oil, if you remember, the oil embargo. and we came out of the Vietnam